Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. And it's a pleasure to be able to welcome you to this third plenary session at this year's HTAi virtual conference. I hope you've been able to enjoy and take part in as much of the agenda so far. This is as I said, this is the third plenary, building off of the story or the discussions around innovation that we've had in the two previous sessions. If you've been on us on this journey throughout the conference, you'll recall that the first plenary on Monday was around innovative methods during these challenging times and gave some interesting insights into the types of methodologies and research and evidence generation that's been necessary to undertake at this time, and how that can help drive the science of HTAi forwards in the future. Yesterday's plenary session was around keeping the reason for being of HTAi is sort of front and center, which is really around keeping patients at the heart of everything that we do. Some interesting topics around how to include and incorporate that patient perspective, how best to capture it, how best to get it involved in the discussions, and to ensure that the focus of what we're trying to do with HTAi is not lost. It's also been incredibly valuable to see the breadth of other focuses around that patient perspective throughout the agenda, both in the workshops pre-meeting, in some of the posters and sessions that we've had, and some of the panel sessions. So that brings us on to today and today's session, today's plenary, looking at sort of the innovation in the technologies that are now coming to market and that HTAi is having to address, and some of the challenging decisions that decision makers are faced with on a day-to-day basis. To do this, we have three speakers representing three diverse perspectives. We have Richard Torbert, who currently is Chief Executive at the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, who will give an industry perspective of what's driving some of the science at the moment and some of the innovative technologies that are working their way through. He's been at ABPI for over 6 years, has a background in other industry associations prior to that, as well as industry experience. Following that, we'll have Jacques Wemer, who is currently President and CEO of the National Healthcare Institute in the Netherlands. So Jacques will give us the perspective of somebody who has to make those decisions around what is covered, what is reimbursed, and what is available for patients in a market. He is the ultimate person responsible for making decisions on the outputs of HTAi. And so we'll hear about some of the challenges that he's faced on that day-to-day basis. He comes from a very good background to be able to do that, being he's previously been a practicing physician for many years, working in obs and gynae, in hospital management, and so now is taking on that role of the person ultimately responsible for what physicians in his previous roles can now use. And then finally, we'll have Dr. Lise Alter, who is the Director of the Medical and Economic and Public Health Assessment at HTAi in France. So Lise has people like Richard on one side bringing technology, saying these advances are fantastic, and then on the other side has decision makers like Jacques saying, how do I know what to make available within my health system? And Lise is the one in the middle who runs the agency doing the HTAi to try and take what's coming from the innovators and turn it into something meaningful for the decision makers and those who have to actually provide healthcare on the other side. So we've got quite a range. The way this panel is going to work, each of them are going to give a brief 12-minute presentation just to give a flavour of some of the challenges that they have to deal with on a daily basis. Then we'll move into a Q&A and a discussion, and it would be great if you could send your questions in through the live Q&A, because the expectation is the second half of this plenary session we will be using the questions that you submit for the panel to answer, to address. While I've been speaking, we've been having a few technical difficulties just getting everybody into a position to be able to speak. So I'm hoping that Richard is now ready to go live. And so if he is, can I welcome Richard onto the stage, please?
Hi, Adrian. Can you hear me?
I can indeed. You're live to the world, Richard. Please do not swear. And over to you. Thank you very much.
Fantastic, Adrian. And your rule about please do not swear might have been a little bit challenging a few moments ago as I was trying to get onto the system. But anyway, that's as difficult as medical technologies are. It's the simple things like laptops and connecting to virtual meetings can sometimes be a problem. So we've changed device and we're ready to go. And I'm hoping that Lee's, who had the same problem with me, is also connecting soon. So, I mean, thank you, Adrian, and thank you, HTAi, for inviting me to join this panel. It's a great lineup, and I'm really delighted to contribute to the discussion. The overall theme of what I wanted to talk about today is finding the right balance. The industry, I believe, has come an awful long way over the last 20 years or so in terms of its attitude towards and its engagement with HTAi. Of all the ways in which society can scrutinise the appropriateness of how much is charged for a given medicine, I think there is now broad consensus that basing that scrutiny on data around how well a medicine works for patients is by far the most rational approach and creates by far the best incentives on companies to produce the best possible medicines, and also the most relevant medicines, and also to collect the most useful data that can fuel evidence-based decision-making in healthcare systems. Having said that, I'm going to use my introductory comments today to argue a little bit that for HTAi to survive politically for the next 20 years, I do think there are a number of drivers of change that we all need to take quite seriously. And these drivers of change need to force us all to reflect on how we collaborate, how we conceive, measure, and reward value. And of course, how we make sensible decisions in an environment of imperfect or changing evidence. So the first driver of change, of course, is the types of medicines that the pharmaceutical industry itself is bringing to market. And if you look at the pipeline today, it's very different from what we've seen in the past. Advances in many fields of science mean that new medicines for previously untreatable diseases, sometimes for very specific small subsets of patients, and sometimes more common diseases where developing treatments has up to now been very challenging, is making new medicines possible. Medicines are being developed to treat patients earlier on in disease pathways with novel mechanisms of action that in some cases are potentially even curative. There are significant developments in areas like gene editing technology, stem cell treatments, combination therapies, and of course, more recently, mRNA vaccines, which in the fullness of time will certainly have application beyond COVID, and antivirals, although of course we need to see many more antivirals than we have today. In many cases, making the best of these new medicines requires a more fundamental rethink of how we organise care. And I think we can do a better job at spotting those areas, those really top priority areas where health system industry dialogue is incredibly important. When it comes to horizon scanning and looking into the pipeline, I think we need to make better use of meta-analyses of classes and broad scientific trends to complement some of the more detailed asset-based horizon scanning instruments that we have around the world. Classic example of this, which is quite an old one now, was hepatitis C. We didn't exactly know which company would be the first to market back in 2014, but we could have been pretty confident that there was going to be a transformational change on the horizon. I picked that example because it was the biggest launch example in recent, or in fact in history of medicines. And I think most health systems, it's fair to say, struggled to spot the significance of the need for early dialogue around system reform. And if we didn't manage it in the biggest area of change, I think that gives us a pretty stark lesson for some of the more rarer conditions and rarer treatments coming to market. So as health systems must prepare and reform if they're to provide rapid access to these innovations, HTAi and how it is conducted has got a key role to play in this, to ensure cost and benefit of these treatments is appropriately evaluated and that value is comprehensively captured. In this light, I think another driver of change is our improved understanding that there are features of value that really matter to patients that are not always adequately captured by our existing tools. We in the industry think that there is a need to have more flexible decision-making frameworks that are underpinned by the more traditional approaches like using cost per quality or just life years as a decision-making criterion, but sufficiently evolved to account for taking more weight to benefit provided by some innovations, for example, for those developed for very severe conditions and those which are targeting small but underserved patient populations. Frameworks should also enable value that is not captured within generic measures like the quality or life years, but is important to patients, health systems, society, and those really need to be influential in decision-making. Another driver of change, I think, is societal expectations around speed of access. There is an ambition in many countries to enable patients to benefit from innovative treatments as soon as possible. Of course, often advances in science mean real hope for patients and their families, and this must remain a key focus for all of us. The industry is working incredibly hard to design clinical trials and generate evidence in a real-world setting that enables the benefits of medicines to be understood by HTAi organisations. However, as we know, the faster we develop medicines, the more immature the evidence packages are when they first arrive at the HTAi organisation's door. Where I am, in England currently, NICE is working hard to review and evolve both its methods and processes to account for innovation in industry's pipeline and to find ways of supporting earlier patient access with the evidence available at the time of regulatory approval. We are really committed to supporting this work, and we look forward with interest at how these challenges are also being overcome in other countries as well. It's incredibly important to get the balance right between speed of access and sustainable access. It's also important to find the right balance between rigorous appraisal methods and processes supported by principles of inclusivity, transparency, and a degree of pragmatism. This is particularly important where HTAi organisations consider the level of uncertainty that's acceptable at the time of their decision-making. The use of managed access and other commercial arrangements is becoming increasingly significant, and again, I think striking the right balance between using these options to support patient access solutions where absolutely necessary, but also finding ways to enable less resource-intensive solutions is really important. The final comment I'd like to make today relates to the need for us all, I believe, both public and private sectors, to really think hard about how we can make HTAi scalable and applicable to larger parts of the world. Earlier this year, I attended the third meeting of the WHO's Fair Pricing Forum, and I've actually attended all three of the meetings, starting 4 or 5 years ago in Amsterdam, through to a couple of years ago in South Africa, and this year's meeting, or virtual meeting, of course, hosted by Argentina. I think the evolution of these discussions has been, very interesting, very important. Back in Amsterdam, there was a huge focus on ideas around cost plus pricing. Could you somehow have an approach to pricing scrutiny based on R&D costs plus a margin? An important conversation, but I think many stakeholders agreed at that meeting that it was practically problematic and also created some unhelpful incentives in the system. Last year, or 2 years ago, I should say, in South Africa, there was an impassioned debate around transparency. And of course, in so many areas of medicines policy, transparency is definitely a good thing. It can drive competition, it can drive good governance. But in aspects of medicines pricing, it can also do more harm than good. This year, I was involved in a fascinating conversation about value-based pricing, and I was particularly struck by HTAi organisation colleagues from lower and middle-income countries who explained, I think in a really articulate way, how hard it is to make good decisions with the analytical resource that they have available. It struck me that this is a challenge that we all need to wrestle with. How can we create globally scalable HTAi that combines sensible sharing of information with appropriate local analysis? At the end of the day, value-based approaches to decision-making are ultimately pretty rational and create the right incentives on all of us. And certainly from an industry perspective, we're really keen to engage in that global dialogue around how we can support value-based approaches around the world. Finally, I'll just close by saying that I don't know a single person in the pharma industry that isn't, thoroughly excited and motivated about the medicines that we are developing to improve patient lives. Equally, of the many HTAi organisation colleagues that I've known over many years, I don't know a single HTAi professional that isn't dedicated to getting the right medicines to the right patients for the right price. I think there's a real common interest there, and through appropriate dialogue, mutual respect and good collaboration, there aren't many problems we can't solve. Thanks very much, and I look forward to the discussion.
Just a quick question for you. You've talked about the industry being a commercial venture. It's driven by science, and yet the issues we're trying to address, or that the industry is trying to address, are very much unmet healthcare needs. It's not like buying a commercial. It's not like buying a phone or a pair of jeans or something. I guess the question that often comes up, and it's been brought to the front a couple of times during the COVID period, is whether a for-profit business model is the right one at the moment. Do you have a perspective on that?
Yes, I think, look, I think the role of profit in healthcare is always something that is an incredibly emotive topic. And because, at the end of the day, healthcare goes, it is a human right to expect the best possible care and the best results of science. I think the reality is the role of the profit-making pharmaceutical industry has proven itself over many decades, over way more than 100 years. The vast majority of medicines that have transformed, lengthened, and improved lives around the world, albeit in a far more unequal way than we would absolutely want, has actually been brought to market by the private profit-making pharmaceutical industry. It's really unfortunate when the debate on profit gets into a them and us debate around industry versus universities versus, the reality is it's a system. Innovation works as part of a system. And just as in other science-based industries like aerospace or automotive or IT, there's an incredibly important role for public sector science in providing some of the basic scientific underpinning of our understanding of disease and the development of underpinning science that underpins technology. But at the end of the day, you need to create an incentive to keep the machine going that actually that takes enormous risk. Globally, the industry invests around $200 billion a year. 200 billion is quick to say, but it's a staggering amount of money. And of course, much of that 200 billion fails. Alzheimer's is a great example. We've had some headlines on how Alzheimer's in the last few weeks. What's perhaps not in the headline is around $40 billion of programs in Alzheimer's that have failed. And what's the industry done is kept going. Governments around the world could not live with $40 billion of failure. Private markets can do that, and they do need to be incentivized. It's not always perfect, but it has led to progress, and I'm convinced it will lead to more.
Okay, thanks, Richard. I'm sure it'd be interesting to see if questions come through on that as well as the session expands. So thank you for that, and we'll now move on to our second speaker. And as I said, I now welcome to the stage Jacques Wemer, so President and CEO of the National Healthcare Institute in the Netherlands, who is responsible for or accountable indeed for determining what is and what is not covered within his healthcare system, and as such is dependent very much on HTAi that we provide evidence for, and that as HTAi agencies deliver that evidence review forwards. So with that, I'll pass over to Jacques.
Thank you, Adrian. Thank you to the audience, and thank you to the organization for having me with you. And Adrian, you said some words. You said I'm ultimately responsible, and I think it's very important to stress that factor. I think we have the responsibility to give the people the right to the innovations that they need, but also we have to spend money, and there are a lot of problems nowadays for governments to deal with. So I think you introduced me very well by saying we have to take these decisions. It's my ultimate responsibility. And I really want to share some challenges with you. And therefore, I want to have my next slide, please. I will show you something about the healthcare in the Netherlands. We have a population of about 17 million people. Our gross domestic product is about 700 billions. And approximately expenditure in the healthcare is about 70 billion. So I think it's a normal range in Europe. It's about 10% of our gross domestic product goes to the health expenditure. We have, and that's another striking factor, we have about 1.1 million people working in the healthcare industry. And if we look forward, if we look to 2040, we see a doubling of possibilities, and that's what Richard said. There are a lot of innovations coming to us, and I think that's a very good side for patients and for our society. But we have to have that comfort. I think that's rather confronting. The question: can we afford it, and how can we afford it? And maybe we can afford it in the money, but roughly 1.1 million people are working in the healthcare sector now, and it would be doubled in 2040. These people are not there. So I think we have great challenges to make our choices and decisions. Next, please. I will tell you something about the healthcare coverage in the Netherlands. We have a universal healthcare coverage. It's private insurance system with public boundaries, and participation is mandatory. Everybody is insured is mandatory insured in the Netherlands, and it's a complete basic package. It's defined by the government, and I think it's a very broad package. Fee is nominal, and otherwise, on the other hand, is dependent on income. We have by law what should be in the package. In the package should be care that is necessary and which really works. Really works. What's that? It should be accessible and it should be affordable. So I think here are the challenges. And I will explain shortly about my institute. We clarify whether new or common treatments are sufficiently effective to be included in the basic package. And I think that we do that on the outcome of assessment outcomes. And we advise our Minister of Public Health, Welfare and Sport about basic health care package contents broadly. And we also advise the Ministry about entire healthcare system, so also about quality. And the next slide, please. And I think this is what I said in my first slide. I think the challenge is to come from linear to cyclical assessments. If you look back for maybe 10 years ago, it didn't seem so hard as now. We had a question, we had an innovation, and we could decide on that, and then we got to our next assessment. And I think what we are standing for is that linear assessments don't meet anymore. That's not enough. We need a cyclical method to do these assessments. And what do I mean with cyclical assessments? We do have to have a very good attention to identification of the problems that coming to us, of our questions that coming to us. We have a sharp agenda. We have risk-orientated analysis of the package continuously. So not only the new package, not only the new decisions, innovations that come to us, but all kinds of issues that come to us, even the common care. So we make signals. We are collecting signals from our from perspective from the sorry, and we have the horizon scanning. that's what Richard said already. So we have to have a clear identification of the problems that come to us. Then we have the assessments, and that's what I said. We have assessments, and after the assessment we have the appraisals, and we do advices to the ministry, but we have to do reassessments. And until now, that's very difficult, because when we once did an assessment, people don't they don't get it when we have a second assessment, and its second assessment was rather different than the first assessment. So we have to identify, we have to assess, and then we have to evaluate. And I think the very important of today is that we need real world data, and the data is to do these assessments in a cyclical way. The next, please. When we go to expensive medicines, I already said we try to be prepared by using the Horizon Scan, and upcomingly also the International Horizon Scanning Initiative, and that's what was in the former talk already. I think this is a very important way to be prepared, and to have time to also to have early dialogues. And I think assessments are really important, but early dialogues are very important too. And after you did your assessment, we have the plaques. One of the rules of the Horizon Scanning is that we make a risk assessment for what's coming to us, and then we provide advices to the Minister of Health that we say, well, these expensive medicines are coming to us, and we advise you to put these expensive medicine in a locker. And that means that only after providing our advice to the ministry, these expensive medicines can be admitted to the package. So this is the risk assessment at the front. The next, please. And I want to deal with you. I think it's very common in all the countries. In the cases in Zolgensma, it just passed in our board for 3 weeks ago. I think it's fair known, but Zolgensma is a gene therapy for the treatment of a subgroup of children with SMA. SMA is a severe disease, and is in progressive muscle wasting, and it's life-threatening for little children. Now we have the treatment of Zolgensma, and it's very hopeful, and the expectancy is that it is a final treatment. And we never had these treatments until now. So this is completely new, and the question is, I think it's no question, our system until now doesn't give the real good answer to these kinds of medicines. It's a 1.9 million euro per treatment. It's the most expensive medicine ever approved in Europe. So I think when this came to our National Healthcare Institute, I was very tense, because I knew there would once be the date that I had to say to advise to the ministry, but also to the society, whether or not that should be admitted to the package. The next, please. The next, yeah. I'm proud about the National Healthcare Institute as a coordinator for UNETA. I think UNETA is very important to have. To be united about HTAi. I think we'll be on that point later. In this case, we did assessment with Benelux, is Ireland, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Austria. And in this case, we did assessment with Ireland and Belgium. And I think you have to choose. You have to choose about a regional cooperation, or or better in European cooperation. I think that's a question later, especially when the decision of the European Council was done yesterday. The next, please. And what did we recommend to the Ministry of Health? And this was, I think, this was really new for us. We said yes. But, and until now, with these very expensive medicines, we said you should not reimburse unless. And I think we went through a case that we said now yes, but. Of course, we advised a significant reduction in price, about 50%, because there's too much uncertainty at the moment. But I think it's most valuable that we said we shouldn't pay now, but we should pay for performance. We should stay in contact with the industry, and we should have more details about efficiency, and then we should yearly provide. Then we should make the decision about the performance, and we should pay for the performance. There's not doing an admission at once, but then we have to do that cyclical, and we have to pay for performance later on. And that was very new, and also in this case, Solgensma is very interested in such a concept. The next, please. So what can we learn from Solgensma, and what's important for HTAi? I think the first thing is that working together in horizon scanning is very important, so that we know what's coming to us, and then we can have discussions already. We can have discussions with the industry already. So we shouldn't wait and see, but we should influence the process at the start. It was also important to work together to divide the workload, and also I think to strengthen through the numbers. What we learned is that we have to conduct less one-off assessments. It doesn't work anymore. We have to go HTAi through the life cycle of the product itself. So it's not a one-size decision at one moment, but it's a cyclic process. And I think that's the great challenge. There is the number of assessments will rise, and the uncertainty will rise even more. So and we have to make the decisions because there are lots of questions to the government for why did you decide on this, because it's so uncertainty. But there's also a great question for why are people not possible to get this medicine? So it's both at the cost, but also there's a great pressure to put these medicines in the package. The next, please. Well, and I come to my challenges to HTAi. People want to have early, and I think we need to, and that's what Richard said already. Early access to innovations is mandatory. It's needed. And then we have limited availability of data. Data. We have limited availability of data, and we have to decide on data. But how do we get these data? With high uncertainty, and there's a great need for additional data to ensure sustainability after a primary decision. And I think that's why, and I think that's why it's great that this conference is now. International collaboration in HTAi is very essential. The next, please. And so I come to my last slide. I think I put forward that this is very important for us to talk with you about sustainability of our decisions, sustainability about HTAi. And that's why we want to be in contact with you, and that's why I already invite you to the next Health Technology Assessment International Annual Meeting in 2022, which will be held in the Netherlands in Utrecht. So I hope to meet you there, and I'm looking forward to the discussion now. Adrian, thank you. I can't hear you.
After 18 months, I'm still forgetting to unmute my microphone of working virtually. Jacques, thank you very much for that overview. And I think it's an honor and a privilege for us to have you here. I think it's very rare that we get somebody, or we don't get people like you here enough, those who actually have to deal with the outputs of HTAi and address the evidence that industry gets to actually make those coverage decisions. That you then have to live with on a day-to-day basis. So thank you for your time. I think you highlight a great point that you're kind of caught in that sweet spot where you've got people, the dilemma is people demanding access to those innovations, and yet you have to manage the costs. And it's a reality. It's a finite bucket. I think what would be interesting to hear, just if you could put some flavour on how much of that policy making decision around what you include and what you don't include. How do you include the HTAi piece in that, or the assessment from your HTAi groups, and how much is driven by other considerations, or what goes through the decision making process when you're making those coverage decisions?
Yeah, well, thank you, Adrian, for the question. We think HTAi is extremely valuable, because for us it's the starting point of the discussion. So even if how demanding the people are, if the HTAi assessment says it's not effective, there's no appraisal, even in Holland. So that I think that says how important HTAi is, and afterwards we have the appraisal. But then in the appraisal, it's more that we say, well, what can we afford in this special case? So HTAi gives the general view, but in the special case, it's on the appraisal, and I think that is more and more complex to do this appraisal, because HTAi is still a kind of work of figures. So we can write them down and we can manage figures. But appraisal is so difficult, and it can only be done if there's a good HTAi work. And if I see, if I look back on my career now in the National Healthcare Institute, and also the Ministry of Health itself, it all starts with HTAi. So we should not, okay, appraisal is important, but it can only start with a good HTAi. And that's why I think it's very challenging to put HTAi forward and make also the society more, they should more know about HTAi, because they only see figures and they say, well, what does a life cost what may a life cost in your opinion? But that's not the point of HTAi. HTAi will, what can we buy for that money? And I think it's HTAi should go a step forward and go to the society.
Okay, thanks, Jack. I should be welcoming our third panelist at the moment, but it looks like we're having some technology issues at the moment. So whilst we wait for that to be sorted out, hopefully we can bring Lee Salter to us shortly. But in the interim, can we bring Richard back, and we'll start a bit of a further Q&A at this stage. Richard, are you excellent? Fantastic. So I'm going to pick on something that, Jacques, that you included in your presentation. This idea of doing cyclical reviews, and it was sort of that living review that you referenced as well, Richard, around, I guess, looking at the package of evidence and making iterative decisions over a period of time. I guess, Jacques, if I can start with you, how are you making that a reality in the Netherlands? What have you got in terms of IT setups, in terms of an evidence base, or is it reliant on the technology developer to do that? And then, Richard, are there any examples on good practice that you can sort of allude to elsewhere? Because I suspect this is likely to be a direction of travel, this more sort of iterative life cycle evaluation as we move forward. Jacques, if I can turn to you first. Yeah, Jacques, you're on mute, I think.
Lie if I say this is the easy way. The easy way is that we put it in our office, and we get the post and we get everything and we put it out. And we have output, and we'll say this is it. The more people you we speak about the subject, the harder it will be. But I think this is the only solution. And retrieving data and getting data, that's the solution in it. I think professionals are very eager to provide this data, but they don't want to do a lot of work extra for it. So that's the discussion in Holland, and the government should make the structure of data so that we that the professions can put forward this data in an easy way, just by doing their professional job. We are, and that's a struggle for the moment. And I think I don't know how it's in England or in other countries, but we are discussing that now, and for the package decisions, we make a special registry now, and the government takes the responsibility that the registry is there, and that the professionals can easily get their data in and out. So we start to take the responsibility as a government for getting these data, Adrian.
Thank you, Jacques. Richard, do you want to just provide a comment on that? And while you answer, I think we'll be getting Lise ready. I think she's almost available. Richard.
Okay, well, I would do my best. I mean, I think the way that Jacques has laid this out, I think is spot on and a really important topic, and particularly in a world where there is more pressure to come to market earlier with more immature data. It stands to reason that data will evolve over time in terms of the data on the medicine. The other side of the equation that will also evolve over time is the market side of things, as companies compete between themselves. So the balance between what's the best package of evidence to fuel our understanding of how well it works versus what do we understand about the supply side of the market is something that you can't just do once and forget about it, it seems to me. Is there any examples of perfect good practice? I don't know. What I do know is that I think there's some examples of pretty bad practice that shows what happens if we don't find a way of getting it right. So if we don't find a way of having a more real-time life cycle approach to evidence-based decision-making that allows us to really understand how the value of different medicines, for example, in a class evolves over time, then what you can get is some payers lurching towards much simpler, much blunter tools, dare I say, like therapeutic tendering, where there's a jump to the conclusion that medicines in a class may be completely therapeutically equivalent, and they're actually not. I think that's much more problematic from an industry perspective, because it kills incentives for future innovation. And I think, you know, it would obviously be, we don't have the technology and data flows yet to do this seamlessly and cheaply in real time. So what's a pragmatic compromise? And I do think it comes back to this idea that it's in everyone's interest. It's in HTAi organizations' interest, and it's in the industry's interest that HTAi is politically sustainable in the long run. And the cost of not being able to operationalize Jacques' really nice slide could be that there'll be a move away from HTAi approaches to managing the life cycle, which I think would be a problem.
Okay. It looks like Lisa's just dropped out again. So another question that's coming from the chat this time and related to that previous issue. The whole idea of this iterative review process clearly introduces a new set of challenges, particularly around if the evidence as it evolves suggests that the technology doesn't work or isn't delivering the benefits that were first anticipated. What do we see as the main challenges around disinvestment in that approach? I guess it's different from disinvesting from a technology that's now been made sort of obsolete through other innovations. I guess, Jacques, have you, within the example that you quoted earlier that you presented to us, have you thought about what will happen with that technology if the evidence base doesn't evolve as you anticipate?
Can you point your question for me another time, once more?
Yes, so as you embark on doing early access to technologies under an access scheme, as you presented the example, how are you going to manage the use or the withdrawal of technology such as that if the evidence base evolves into a position where it's not delivering the evidence that was expected? What are the safeguards that you've got in place?
If you look back, Adrian, I shouldn't be too positive about it, because once something is admitted, you never get it from the package. But looking forward, I think the decision why we did it in this way, we could share it with the society. 10 years ago, there was only a demand, and there was a clear, sharp decision. And the decision was, it wasn't possible at that time to share the backgrounds of the decision. When we did a decision about a very expensive medicine, and the first time that we said, well, we shouldn't do it unconditionally. We should, not in these conditions. People were outrageous because we didn't go to the societal wishes. But today it was possible to talk with the society about our decision, and in that talk we also said we could say, well, we give it as an advantage now, or we give it. But not to any price. So we do it now, but we have to check whether the balance will be in the interest of our society. Okay, so we introduced it as an admission to the package, but with these warnings. And now also the Ministry of Health, etc., will put this central in the decision. So they will ask us to do it. It's not that we will do it, but we have to do it, and we have to put forward these figures, etc., also to the society, whether or not it's a good decision in the end. So it's a long way of talking, but I think the most important is we did not a yes or no decision on the screens, but we did talk to the society, and so they are part. That the society is part of the decision. So if in the end there's less efficacy in this medicine, in this gene therapy, I think. We and the society is not. I think it's okay to either to have less the price reduction, or we put it out of the market.
Richard, have you got anything you want to add to that one, or?
Well, I think as I read the question, I think I think the thing to say from my point of view is that, you know, from an industry perspective, we have to be fundamentally in support of evidence-based decision making and evidence-based healthcare. And I completely understand the practical nervousness that there will be at times of, as soon as you say yes, it's very, very hard to pull back from that. And that I think ought to be seen as a problem for all of us. And I think the industry, you know, should be very constructive in how it approaches the dialogue with health systems on that front. I think one avenue of, I think, positive change, certainly recently in the country that I come from, is that there's been increasing, I think, acceptance that we shouldn't just have yes or no decisions. There's a maybe in the middle. And it's the how do we deal with the maybes is really the crux of this, it seems to me. And the maybe means, you know, where you've got perhaps immature evidence and you need to enter into some sort of managed entry agreement or some kind of conditional process. And the whole point of that is that there does need to be conditions. They need to be met. You need to collect the data, and, you know, clinical practice needs to adjust based on the outcome of that. I think if we don't support that principle, then it's not going to work. So I don't have a better answer than that, other than let's get a good way of managing the maybes.
Yeah. Okay. Just bear with me 1 second. We still don't have Lisa. There's some technical issues, so we'll carry on with the Q&A at the moment. So time for a pandemic-related question. So I think what we've seen over the last 18 months is just how quickly innovation can work when everything's aligned and everybody's aligned behind one objective and one thing. So we can see that innovation has been accelerated. What's that taught us that we can take back to that post-pandemic period? I suspect we're not all going to be driving at sort of 100% focused on one issue forever. So what are the learnings, and I guess what are the watch outs from that pandemic experience? What can we expect to continue, and what was unique because of that, and should we not extrapolate to other areas moving forwards? Richard, do you want to start with that one?
I'm happy to kick things off. It's been the most extraordinary 18 months. I think the most optimistic voices in the industry this time last year, or perhaps a little bit before this time last year, was talking about a 3 to 5 year time frame for having a vaccine. The fact that we had several approved within a year is completely extraordinary. We need to 100% redouble our efforts to make sure they're equitably distributed around the world. That's got to be the biggest societal problem of the age that we're in right now. But the good news story is the innovation worked, and it worked because of extraordinary partnership between universities, hospitals, health systems, and the industry. And I hope that the experience will shine a huge light on the value of each of those components. I obviously hope that the value of the private sector is recognized in that, because the companies really have thrown their weight behind this in a way that has been extraordinary. Why were the clinical trials doable in such a short period of time? Of course, it's, the unfortunate truth is that trials were able to recruit many tens of thousands of patients very, very quickly, because it was a very severe disease, and no corners were cut. But it's just in normal times, you don't get that many patients coming onto trials so quickly to give you the data in time to go through the regulation. So I think it was unusual in that circumstance. I do think when it comes to some of the therapeutics, I think the differential story that we've seen in different parts of the world around what trials have given us really useful evidence is important. Particularly the large platform studies were incredibly powerful, proving that hydroxychloroquine was not useful and proving that dexamethasone was useful, was in a very, very simple way, really simple endpoints, good, simple trial designs that hospitals could work with very, very quickly. Great. Can we do that for everything? Probably not. Most of those molecules were 50 or 60 years old. Simple mortality endpoints probably wouldn't work for everything. And if you're in real novel therapeutics and novel innovation, you need a more sophisticated approach to testing what's going to work in what disease area. But a lot of huge positives have come out of this, and I definitely hope we can build on that principle of partnership.
And I guess one of the things that gets lost in the vaccine discussion too is the vaccine failures that have happened as well over the last 18 months, of which there are numerous. It's not every vaccine that started has made it to market. I just see that Lise has joined us as well. So gents, if you don't mind, I'm going to exit you stage right and invite Lise Alter to join us on stage. If I just give you a brief introduction, Lise, you are currently Director of Medical, Economic and Public Health Assessments at HOS, the French HTAi agency. Okay. I've just been informed that Lise, we may just be a moment or two. Let me just finish her introduction, and then we'll see if we're able to go to her. Or otherwise, we'll continue with the discussion with the other panelists. So, as I said, Lise is basically head of the assessment group within HUS. She's previously worked in a number of public health administrations within France, including the Ministry of Health, where she was responsible for numerous programs, including innovation, clinical research, and particularly on issues such as telemedicine and telesurveillance. So clearly, has hands-on experience of dealing with issues related to innovative technologies. She also has spent a period of time working in the industry, so has a view of the issues from multiple perspectives, and is here today to give us an overview of how HUS is addressing some of the emerging challenges, ongoing challenges with HTAi and the kinds of innovative technologies that we're currently dealing with. If you just allow me a moment to pause to see if Lise is available to join us on the virtual stage.
Yes.
Excellent. Yes, I can. Lise, while we have you, over to you. I've done your introduction, and
yes.
To you. Thank you very much.
Can you
Yes, I can hear you, Lise.
Thank you for the intro. I'm very happy to have the opportunity to share the HIS view on the field.
I apologize for that. It looks like we've still got some connection issues with Lise, and we will continue to try and address those. If we can get Lise back before the end of the session, we will do. In the meantime, we'll go back to our discussion with our other panelists. So if I can welcome back Richard and Jacques, and we'll move to the live Q&A. If you've got questions, please put them in. I can see we've got a feast of questions coming through. I guess an interesting one here to start with, and Jacques, I'm going to present this one to you first, if you don't mind. And that's, how do we make sure that the priorities of HTAi are focused on your primary needs, so your most pressing issues, rather than just the innovations that are coming through, which are effectively driven by where the cutting edge science is at the moment. So how do you balance that with your HTAi agency in the Netherlands? I believe you're on mute again, Jack.
After 18 months. Okay. we are in the lucky situation that we're not only we as National Healthcare Institute give the advices to the minister, but we also do the HTAi in our office. So we are in a very close contact with our HTAi people. I think that's very important that HTAi and the are working together. And if I look to the UNETA, we have the HTAi, and we have the bodies that work hard together to give, in the end, the good results that we need. So there's a ping, but okay. And I think in a session like this, it's very important to point out why do we do HTAi, and what questions are addressed to HTAi. So HTAi shouldn't be something apart, but HTAi is doing a job in the admission or in giving good care to the people of the world. And that discussion, we should have that discussion. And if only the industry would dominate in HTAi, I think that wouldn't be very wise. But I think they have to talk with us about how we manage the challenges in HTAi. So we shouldn't go. We have to work together on that, and we are in the lucky situation that we can. That we have the discussions. We have the discussion now, and we should have the discussions more, I think. And I'm in the lucky situation that we have our HTAi in our own office, so we can fix it together.
I mean, are we at the stage really where we should just accept that, some form of contingent approval of innovative technologies is now the norm? I think we've kind of moved on from those early days of HTAi assessments where we had a relatively full body of evidence and we could fulfill an overall survival curve reasonably well to get a fairly certain quality estimate. And where the science has brought us over the last decade is much earlier, much more innovative, much more personalised, and that evidence base is really only going to grow through collaborative engagement between industry, the users, and the reimbursement agencies. Are we now at a stage where contingent approval is the norm? Richard, what's your view on that?
I don't know whether it would be the norm, but it probably makes sense given the pipeline to see contingent approvals more frequently than we do today, perhaps. I'm not sure I've got more of an answer than that, really. I think if it doesn't need to be the norm, then it's a question of balancing what undoubtedly is scarce resources for all of these organizations. If we ever get to a point where we have the technology and infrastructure to make in line with our previous conversation about how we get to a more life cycle approach to analyzing evidence over time, maybe the question is less about contingent approvals and more about how we keep the decisions and the guidance live, if you like. But that's probably a very garbled answer, Adrian, but I think the short answer is contingent for everything. Probably not, if that's unnecessary, but it wouldn't surprise me if you see it more frequently.
Jacques, is it going to become more of the norm to the way you work moving forward? So are you going to have to learn to live with these kind of managed entry agreements on a more routine basis?
The honest answer is yes. I think we have to live with that. But there are some issues. Supply-induced demand, there is supply-induced demand, and if the supply-induced demand would be penetrating in HTAi, I think that's we don't want that. So the starting point is the demand of the patient and not a supply-induced demand. And I think we are questioning now how we manage it. and on behalf of that, we have it now on the package, but there are also caregivers or industry-driven things that, well, they say, well, then it won't be in the package anymore. We give it privately. So we have to deal with it, because if we would be we enclose ourselves, they will go around us. So, and I think that's not good for people's health. So I think we have to deal with it, Adrian.
Okay.
And maybe Richard can comment on that, because the industry will. There's also a drive to penetrate into the society with the industry things.
I mean, I'm not sure I understand the question, Jacques. Are you saying that you're seeing companies more eager to get into these sorts of conversations? I mean, I think the proof will be in how many companies come forward, of course. I mean, what I hear from companies, for what it's worth, is a lot more nervousness from companies about the push towards quicker decisions than perhaps I hear from policymakers, to be honest. I mean, there's no doubt that there is, pressure on early approval, which drives uncertainty, which drives conditional decisions. But increasingly, I'm seeing companies, at least come to me and say, be careful about what you're asking for. We don't want speed at all costs. If we're pushed into a situation where we have a really very early assessment, and that leads you to a sort of contingent approval that is very difficult to manage, then we'd rather wait and rather kind of do it properly. So But I think the proof will ultimately be in what you're seeing in companies coming forward. That's just a perception, really, from my side.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's change tack a little bit now. And yesterday there was the announcement from the European institutions that it looks like they've made headway on agreeing a text for the proposed EU HTAi regulation. I realize we have a global audience here, but I think this has been quite big news, certainly within the European contingent over the last 24 hours, and clearly has been a focus of activity for a number of years. Whilst we don't know the detail of the text of that regulation, we know that it's proposing more alignment on issues like scientific advice, collaboration around the development of joint clinical assessments, particularly for pharmaceuticals at the time of launch. I think it's unclear about other technologies at the moment. With that, whilst we can't talk about the details, I guess it'd be interesting from you from an industry perspective, although I know due to issues over the last couple of years, you might be less directly engaged in it, Richard, from that B word.
I can't think what issues you mean, Adrian.
But what would your hopes be for the regulation if it were to be successful moving forwards, from an industry perspective? And Jacques, from somebody who uses this information, what do you need this collaboration to deliver so that it's meaningful for you as a decision maker and also efficient for your HTAi department, within your organization? Richard, I'll turn to you first. I'll give Jacques some thinking time.
Well, I think you can see you're an impartial chair, and from an industry perspective, Adrian, because you've given me no thinking time whatsoever. Joking aside about Brexit, I have personally not been engaged in these discussions around the EU HTAi legislation, and I have to say what I'm going to say is definitely a personal instinct rather than a thoughtful representative view of my industry colleagues or members. For what I've seen of this debate over the years, there's a lot of merit in exploring to what extent can there be a pragmatic alignment around some of these big questions that you've just outlined, Adrian. And that always seems to make sense to me, because at the end of the day, that unlocks the possibility of a discussion around helping countries move a little bit further along the road of value-based decision-making than they would otherwise be, given the level of resources and capabilities they perhaps have. And I think that is true within the European Union. And in line with some of the comments I made earlier, I think there's a much bigger, potentially more longer term question about how that would apply to other parts of the world as well. But that, let's not bite off more than we can chew, to begin with. The nervousness on the part of companies, of course, throughout the discussions around any level of EU cooperation, is to what extent is EU level cooperation going to lead to a streamlining and clarification of processes versus additional hurdles and additional and duplicative processes and more cost and more contradictions in, potentially which lead to much more cost, because it's not just the admin, it's the what's the data you have to invest in through trials as well. So I think aspiration is, there's definitely a sensible version of this that I could see adding real value to Europe and potentially beyond. But there's some obvious pitfalls that we should avoid in terms of duplication and cost. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Jacques, do you want to provide your perspective?
I think the reduction of duplication of work, both for HTAi and industry, I think it's a tremendous chance. We discussed about the challenges we are facing and we will face, and they're rather big, I think. So if we could reduce duplication and both for the HTAi and for the industry, I think we should have time also, and we could create expertise centers. So I think we could use our energy in a better way, expertise center, expert networks, and so that we can ensure that we use our resources in an effective way, an efficient way. And Richard, I've been with the UNETA now for some years, and the Netherlands, het Zorginstituut Nederland, the National Healthcare Institute in the Netherlands, also does the secretary on UNETA. And we put a lot of energy in it because we know we are a small country, but we want to do HTAi in a very good way. So it costs us a lot of efforts now, and we want to use these efforts, and we want to share these efforts. And I think that's the way we went with UNETA. So I see it as the crown on UNETA that we achieve this, and not only for the HTAi, also for the industry. By not doing reduplications and by having expert centra and making more use from our expertise. So I think it's a way forward. And Richard, I don't know what it will be, what it will mean for your country, because things happened. But also in UNETA, the UK is still participating. So I think it's good hope that it will also be for your country.
Well, I started my career in the European Commission in Brussels, so I still have a secret project to start a new campaign to rejoin very soon.
Yeah, okay.
I may have to wait a while though.
Yeah. Thanks, and it's a shame. It's a shame Dr. Alte isn't here. I know this was an issue that was she was very keen to engage in the conversation, and so I guess just for just to put sort of the full flavour on for the audience who are participating, I know that from an industry side that are engaged, they're supportive if it does reduce duplication and is used and doesn't lead to an extra layer of activity. And I know from the agency side, they're keen to get access to that broader HTAi community, hopefully to drive more alignment on methods and processes, but also to share that information more appropriately. And I think just to try and check off one or two other questions as we do this, I think if that HTAi regulation actually delivers and does succeed, then actually that's going to be a huge resource in terms of those joint clinical assessments, which are focusing purely on the evaluation of the relative clinical benefits for other markets and those that are in lower and middle income countries who are looking to introduce HTAi, then there is the potential, because they will be publicly available documents, for them to be leveraged in other markets beyond the EMEA borders. And I know a number of those markets look to established agencies already, but language is obviously an issue and contextual consideration. So those European clinical assessment reports could well have value to the HTAi community in a much broader way beyond the initial expectation. Apologies for my staggering. I'm just seeing if we're going to get Lise in. I'll keep an eye out. It doesn't look like she's in the green room at the moment. So Jacques, one question that is coming specifically for you really is, how do you deal with the pressure from clinicians and patients, I guess, which is purely or comes very much from the emotive or the political perspective when you're dealing with reimbursement decisions of new technologies onto the market? How do you manage to balance that with that scientific decision of basing decisions on HTAi?
Yeah. Well, you said I'm the one who has the ultimate responsibility, but happily I'm not alone. But I've been a clinician, as you said in the introduction, for 24 years, and when I was treating patients, I never had to say no to a patient. I could do everything could be done. I was never checking for the reimbursement. A year after one of the first board meetings when I went to the National Healthcare Institute, it was about I think Spinraza or something, and we had a real discussion in the board, and I, as a person, as a professional, I nearly couldn't manage to say no, or that we had a conditional. But when you are in more and more in contact with the decision makers, and you can go into the discussion also with the professionals, you can have the right discussion about, well, we have to take the decision because we can't do everything. More and more professionals do know and do realize that not everything what is possible can be done. So we have these discussions. Honestly, the first period that I was in this position, I had more or less sleepless nights because, well, I said, how do I have to manage with these problems? But we have somebody has to do. I do not do this alone. We have this HTAi department. We have the appraisal department. We have discussions with patients, with professionals, with industry. They're coming into this our meetings about when we are making the decisions. They're patients and industries and professions. They can give their input. So if we have come to this decision, well, the decision is widely spread already. So we are in contact with all these people. But even then, sometimes it's still hard to deal with professionals who really think, well, when I meet the patient tomorrow, I will give this treatment. I want to give this treatment because it's good for this patient. And then we say, as a decision maker, well, it might be good for the patient, but you didn't give the evidence that it was for that group of patients. So I think we could talk a day about this subject, and we have to be in close contact. And there's always a difference in thinking as a decision maker and as a professional, and we have to accept it. And I do accept it.
And do you find you're successful in your role because of that experience that you've had from the professional background, and that carries weight with the clinical community that are lobbying you? Has that what makes it feasible for you to do your job?
Honestly, I think one of the reasons why I came to this position was that I had the professional experience, and I have faced the problems from professional point of view. So I know how we as professionals discuss with each other. So I think it's easier in my position to have these discussions. And I expected that this would be a very great advantage, but I have learned that I have to deal in a different way, and now I'm the decision maker. So yes, we can talk about it, but I have other criteria than I formerly had. It's a discussion, and more we're successful to have the discussion. That's true.
Excellent, thanks, Jacques. Richard, as we come out of this sort of post-pandemic period and hopefully move more to some sort of new normality, whatever that may or may not look like, you know, the reputation of the pharma industry, I'm kind of intrigued to know what state you think it's going to be in to drive its innovation forwards, because, you know, it was probably a bit mixed before the pandemic. Early on in the pandemic, it seemed to rise quite significantly because it was providing opportunities and offerings. And in some fields at the moment, it seems to be taking a bit of a dip again, at least in some of the political environments. I mean, how's the industry going to weather this, and how's that going to influence its ability to continue its innovative agenda moving forwards? And you're on mute too, where that's an own goal to each of us so far.
Yeah, well, there we go, discussed. So I was listening to one of our CEOs yesterday, which was a variation on an old phrase where he said, you know, reputation is gained in drops but lost in buckets. And I think that, look, I work in the pharmaceutical industry because I'm a firm believer that the pharma industry is fundamentally there doing a great service for society, and is doing well and bringing incredible medicines to patients. And I really, really believe that. And I've not met anybody working in the pharmaceutical industry that isn't absolutely working for the right reasons. But it comes back to one of your earlier questions around the obvious sensitivity around the notion of profit, around what does the right price look like, around the completely reasonable societal expectation that we need to optimize for the maximum number of patients, not the maximum price. We need to be making sure, you know, there's revenues of companies are built on price and volume, and we need to make sure that the volume is meaning we're getting to the maximum number of patients. I think if anyone in the industry doesn't believe in that, I think they need to look in the mirror. And I hope that there is wider and wider recognition of that principle. I think that there has been much greater recognition of some of the good things that we're able to do over the last 18 months. We've actually conducted some of our own polling, actually some opinion polling of the pharma industry. And one of the insights that we've had from that has been that among the members of the public that feel like they know what we do, our reputation is far stronger than among those members of the public that actually don't know what we do and have never really engaged with us. So the closer that people generally get to really understanding what the pharma industry is trying to do, generally speaking, I think the better the perception. I think that we would be kidding ourselves to think that it's easy riding from here and that the reputation is going to open doors. It won't, because these tensions will always be there. I hope that we've shown that we can do amazing things and we can really work for the societal good, and we need to keep that up, because we're not going to get rid of this pandemic anytime soon. We're going to have to live with coronaviruses and learn to manage coronaviruses, and the pharma industry is going to be a critical partner to health systems around the world on that. But as we get back to a business as usual, and as we get back to trying to progress some of the other disease areas where the companies have been putting huge efforts over the years, we will inevitably face the same sort of tensions around what does value mean, what does the right price, that we always have done. Final maybe comment to make is that, I think some of our fiercest detractors, and I'm going to call out not some individual names, but I'm going to call out some themes that we see, like get rid of intellectual property rights and that will solve the problem. Well, it won't solve the problem, right? The pharma industry globally will be producing 11 billion doses of COVID-19 vaccine this year, 11 billion. If you get rid of intellectual property rights, it will reduce that number, because it will mean that scarce raw materials, which are the real barrier, will be dispersed to companies that potentially don't know what they're doing. And it would cause a long-term problem, because we need those companies to keep investing, so that if we do have escape variants, we're able to deal with them with adapted vaccines, as we go down the line. Other memes that we get, pharma industry doesn't invent in medicines, they're all invented in universities. I mean, total nonsense. It's complete nonsense, provably nonsense. And again, I hope that the greater spotlight on the industry will ultimately put a spotlight onto the fragility of some of these arguments, because they are wrong. They are all things that we can have an evidence-based debate about, and we're happy to do that. And we're happy to provide all of the evidence around exactly what the pharma industry does. $200 billion on R&D a year is certainly not nothing. So anyway,
thank you, Richard. That's good, because I've noticed we're coming towards the end, and I want to give Jacques one more opportunity to speak. I think a similar question for you, Jacques, as we come out of this post-pandemic period, have you got other issues now as a result of this, such as a backlog of other interventions that need to be delivered, such as elective care, or other kind? Has it given you any reason to reassess your priorities and actually put those innovations that are coming through from industry in a different light? So what's your focus moving forward? And I guess, as Richard said, one of the unmet needs that's kind of been brought to life through the pandemic, for example, is mental health. So Jacques, your closing thoughts.
Yeah. Well, one of the main things we have seen in this pandemic is the rise of the digital care. Digital in general, but as you said, digital care in mental health especially. So I think the number one issue now is digital care. And two, we already had problems with capacity and budgets. And during this pandemic, the discussion on prevention has grown a lot. So we were already the problem of do we have enough capacity and budget? So we had to take these hard decisions. But more and more people say, well, we should be at the front of disease. Prevention should be number one. And I do doubt if prevention will, in the end, cut the costs in care. But that's what the society asks from us. And on the other hand, digital care is set to number two in Holland, and we have seen a very steep rise in digital care, but we have also seen a deep slope again as the pandemic flews away. So these are the two main issues, Adrian.
Thank you very much, Jacques. I see we're down to our last 30 seconds for this panel session. First of all, I can only apologise for the issues we've had with not being able to get Lise Alter onto the panel today. There's been some questions as to whether we can get her talk put online afterwards. We'll look forward to that. Thank you for your attendance. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Jacques, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you all.